So, this is going to be kind of a not super in-depth, but I would say relatively in-depth guide about Filian. Kind of, what I've learned over the past few months of playing her, and what I think my go-to strategy is for playing her. So, I'm only going to talk about the ultimate with the chain boost. I think the Fruit Snack one is pretty bad, and there's kind of no point in playing her. You can just play a normal, like, speed ultimate, or even Shiba if you want to, like, terrorize lobbies. So, I'll talk about kind of her base stats in this section and just, give kind of a brief overview of the character. So, Filian basically has kind of a base speed that is like the upper tier of speed characters. It's something like 110 kilometers an hour on your third drift boost. So, I think it's slightly better than Bulma, but it's nothing to brag about, right? It's not like Squidward. And in terms of the base stats, the other base stat that's important, in my opinion, handling, she is kind of like middling. She's not super good, not super bad, definitely not Chibin level. She's actually somewhere around Bulma, maybe a tiny bit better than Bulma. So just to give some perspective on the base stats, yeah, I think that's just about where she sits. So in the next section, I'll talk about kind of the general strategy and, yeah, how I approach a race as Filian. So, what is Filian Ultimate? How does it work? What does it do? How does it differ from something like a Bulma Ultimate? So if I just charge up the ultimate here, you'll see I get something similar to like a Bulma speed boost at first, like this. I'm 165 kilometers an hour, whatever, and then I self-daze myself. So kind of the self-daze is obviously what separates Filian ult from what would be like a normal Bulma ultimate or whatever speed character you want. Um, if you run this into an opponent, like I'll do to these dummies, you see it says chain boost at the top of my screen. So I think most people know how Filian Ultimate works, but if you don't, essentially what it is that self-daze, if I use this again in the open, self-daze, you'll see an explosion that's like around my character, right? It's actually a little bit behind your character, and that's important to know. I'm not sure if it's a netcode thing or if it's intentional or what, but the explosion is a little bit behind your character. And what it does is it refreshes your ultimate if that explosion hits an enemy. So you essentially get two back-to-back Filian ultimates. And on the second one, if you do the same thing, so if you explode another person at the end of the second ultimate, you get a third refresh. And that refresh, I'll see if I can do it here. So this refresh will not daze me. So you saw I exploded on the target dummies 2 times. And after the second explosion, I basically get another Bulma ultimate at the end that just acts as a standard Bulma ultimate. So you get a big speed boost, and you do not self-daze with the last one, and that's pretty much what makes Filian's ultimate unique, and that's like the, kind of like the main thing to know about it. And like I said, the hitbox is behind you, so if you run up to a character and you explode right behind them, a lot of the time it's going to be confusing because it'll look like it hit, but it actually didn't, and it's because the hitbox is behind you. So, talking about Filian's ultimate as like a general kind of strategy rule, Filian can use any form of dodging dazes to dodge the self-daze, so you don't necessarily have to hit a double chain to not get dazed by your ultimate. You can do, dodge into an iframe, or you can basically do anything that you would use to dodge an item. So you can go into an iframe, you can shield it, whatever, right? And that's why you'll hear a lot about iframes and shields in this guide. And as a general rule, Filian's ultimate really should never be like randomly clicked. If I'm just racing, you really don't want to use this as a Bulma ultimate where I just pop it and then daze myself, because you pretty much like it almost ends up as like a net neutral. If you're driving next to people in a normal race and you ult and you daze yourself on the first try, those people will catch up to you while you're sitting still. So you're going to have very little success if you just kind of randomly use it as like a Bulma ultimate, and you really need to use it strategically, which is kind of the reason that I'm making this guide, because a lot of people, I feel like, probably don't really understand the character and just like kind of pop the ult off cooldown and think the character is terrible. So yeah, you basically just want to make sure you're using the ultimate when you have items, and I'm going to cover the rest of the strategy kind of like more in depth in the rest of the guide. So, in the first real section of this guide, I'm going to be talking about the general kind of strategy and approach that I take to races as Filian. So, as a general rule of thumb, you almost always want to sandbag for coins and items right at the start of a race. And it also really doesn't matter how far behind you get, especially on the maps that are long. So, you can think of Nordic, maybe Cyber. These maps, you know, Vault, these maps that are kind of like almost 2 minutes long, some of them are even longer than 2 minutes. It really doesn't matter what place you're in. And I'm going to put a clip here of my cyber gameplay because I think that's most kind of applicable to the section, where I literally stop in second place at the start of a race when I'm already 10 coins just to get better items. It might seem counterintuitive if you're used to front running or if you're used to playing characters like Obobot or these characters that, you know, you can just stay at the front, Bulma, and just win races that way. But Filian is super weak when you try to front run and play from ahead. You'll kind of hear me talk about the ulting into iframes and stuff later in the video, so I'm not going to go into depth here. But you'll, trust me when I say you'll have a lot more success when you're playing from behind and just trying to finish the map really strong. So you don't have to play very strong the whole time, you just have to finish the map really strong, with which is pretty much 3 back-to-back Bulma ultimates and just properly activated items. So that's pretty much it for general strategy. Just, you know, TLDR, sandbag for coins and items right at the start. Doesn't really matter if you're far behind or not. And you really want to stay behind the pack and just try to get chains to catch up to the pack and pass people right at the end. When we talk about items on Filian, there really are 3 main items under one classification that you really kind of want to aim for. These 3 items being the Duck, the Stock Market, and the Golden Shield. Now, the reason for this is because a shield can block the self-days of your ultimate, and if you don't have any iframes on a map, then the shield is pretty much mandatory. It's extremely hard to perform well on a map with no iframes if you don't have a shield, unless it's, like, unbelievably easy to chain on the map. And there are some maps that are like that, but it's, you know, kind of slim to none, really. So you really want to try to stick around like 9th to 12th place to hit either a Duck or a Stock Market from items. Now this is of course all conjecture, I don't actually have any data on the items, but if you can't hit iframes like this on Western, you really are going to need a shield on most maps in order to block the days of your ultimate, just so that you can get like a little bit more use out of it, and you can kind of make use of that deceleration period that you wouldn't actually make use of if you were hitting an iframe. Now, other useful items, other than the shields, are Golden Bull and Triple Bull. Now, I pretty much only put these 2. I don't want to talk about offensive items because this is, like, not particularly realistic if you're going to be sandbagging. I'm just going to focus on the ones that are, like, highly impactful. Golden Bull is really good for catching the pack, as you would have seen earlier in this Western gameplay clip. And it's also really good for gapping. So there are clips in the future that you can see where I use a Golden Bull to gap ahead of people. And really it's kind of just making up for the lack of speed that Filian has normally. She has above average base speed, but her ultimate speed is like pretty horrible if you're not chaining people. So you really need to use the Golden Bull to separate yourself from the pack and really like get ahead of people. The Triple Bull, I would say, is mostly used for recovery. It's not super useful for speed because it's basically just a Golden Bull that only has 3 charges. So a Triple Bull, you really want to try to find a use for it outside of just using it as a worse Golden Bull. And for me, that's just recovery. So if somebody, you know, comes melee range and hits me with a beach ball that I can't dodge, a bull is a, you know, one of the 3 Triple Bull charges is a very useful way to kind of like minimize the negative impact of other people's items. So a lot of people complain about items, how there's little counterplay, and although I do agree, there are some things that, you know, people can optimize further in their gameplay where rather than just using the Triple Bull to try to get ahead of the person who's next to you, use it for recovery. You use it as if it were a shield, and you have to use it reactively rather than preemptively, right? If we're talking about bad items on Filian, we can talk about Coin Tornado and Ram. These are the 2 items that you will see, you know, actually quite often. And the Coin Tornado especially is, I think, a big problem with the current item pool. I think it's a big problem that you can have max coins and still hit a Coin Tornado, but you basically just have to learn how to effectively cycle these items. As soon as you get a Coin Tornado, use it if you're not at 10 coins, especially. You just want to get 10 coins immediately so you can start catching up with the pack. The Ram, you really just want to dump insta if it's, like, as long as it's not going to put you in, like, 3rd or something so you start getting trash items. If you use an item on top of an item set, you will get the new item regardless of the duration of the current one, so you really want to just use that to your advantage to cycle Coin Tornadoes and Rams. Now I'm going to talk about maps. So I'll just do a brief overview of what maps are good or bad, and kind of which maps you should or shouldn't be voting for, and also maybe a general structure of what makes maps good, so that if you don't exactly remember if a map is good or not, you can kind of just think about it, like, in the amount of time you have to vote. So what makes a map good for Filian? I would say generally ones that either have lots of iframes, have tight corridors, or both. So Trading Floor would be a map that is a good example of both. OBK City would be a example of a map that has tight corridors. Everybody kind of follows the same line. And so despite there not being any iframes, it actually is quite good because you can just chain people to make up for the lack of iframes. And what makes a map bad for Filian? So off the top of my head, very uneven terrain, like Sky Dragons. Her ult is lacking kind of verticality on the hitbox. So if you're above somebody, the chain kind of just doesn't go off a lot of the time. Another example would be sharp turns or spirals, especially near the end of the map. So Amazon, either Japan map, Sky Dragons, these kind of maps, it's very hard to chain people and have a strong finish on a map where if you're going too fast, you just get stuck on a wall or you fall off the map or that kind of thing. And I guess the last thing would be maps with alt boxes or alt strips. So think Toy Box or the prison map, Prison Break or whatever it's called. These are maps where there are alt boxes, so characters like Bulma can just alt off cooldown where you just can't. And you're basically just you're kind of just let out to dry because you just can't use the alt boxes, and everybody just gains like a few seconds worth of alt charge from every box. So the maps with, also wide corridors, so Toy Box is another example of that, and kind of ending sections that have a lot of verticality or a lot of obstacles. So again, Toy Box with those dominoes, with the things that drop on the course, like a lot of these things that get in your way of alting people generally are quite bad. And I'll throw a tier list on screen and also in the description that I can actually update if there's ever a patch with new maps, or maybe there's a new map rotation, or Filian gets updated, whatever. And I'll just kind of include every map from, best to worst. And I'll just throw that there, and yeah, if you want to play Filian and you want to see what maps are good or bad, you can just reference that. Just to touch lightly on some more advanced concepts in this final section, I'm going to include a clip from Test of Strength from the most recent, I think it was the semifinals of the most recent regional, or maybe it was the finals, where I'm ulting intentionally late into iframes, and this causes me and another person to go through the iframes at the same time. Then when we come out of the invincibility, I chain the person because we're guaranteed to land in the same spot. This is a more advanced concept that I haven't really seen any other Filian players do, and you pretty much can only make use of it on like a select few maps. So Test of Strength and Atlantis are the two that come to mind immediately. On Test of Strength, right after the finish line, there's a very, very short iframe, and if you ult right as you come around the corner, a little bit past the corner, your ultimate will explode right as you come out of the invincibility. The reason this is good is because you can get a chain, which is essentially just an extra Filian ult, off of whoever you land next to, and it's almost risk-free. Like, you essentially can't miss it. So this obviously is good, especially if you have a shield, because you can shield the second days that would come, and you can mega gap on the test maps. It's harder on Test of Ice because you don't really have the handling to make, like, the hairpin turn, but you can do this on Atlantis as well, and I can try to include both clips of those if I can find the Atlantis one. But this is kind of like a more advanced concept that it's really going to take the timing to... You really have to learn the timing for it, but once you get it down, it's, like, extremely useful. So that's going to be it for my Filian guide. I appreciate everybody for watching, and if you've never played Filian, try her out. Next time there's a QFT on Morph's stream, or even if I'm hosting a custom one, come join in, try out Filian, and see what you can make happen. I appreciate you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.